people have seen this and noticed it and are chipping away at the institutional barriers by creating pathways and creating opportunities or pilots or encouraging folks to think in an innovative fashion about how they do something.
Today on the Daily Scoop podcast from the Scoop News Group, tech priority suggestions for the Trump administration. Ross Nodurft of the Alliance for Digital Innovation joins the show. It's Tuesday, January 21st, 2025. Welcome to the Daily Scoop podcast, where you'll hear the latest news and trends facing government leaders. I'm the host of the Daily Scoop podcast, Billy Mitchell. Thanks so much for joining me. Now let's dive into today's top headlines. Just hours after the Trump administration took office Monday, the president signed a flurry of executive orders, many of which are likely to have significant impact on federal technology operations. Most notably, Donald Trump signed orders to claw back Joe Biden's executive order on artificial intelligence and called for a return to office for federal employees. Trump's repeal of the AIEO didn't come with any policy replacing the Biden administration's, which established a roadmap for the federal government to address the growing technology while managing risks. That order prompted Office of Management and Budget memos spelling out specific steps for agencies to manage and monitor their AI use cases, acquire AI, and address the technology in national security settings. It also launched the pilot for the National AI Research Resource, which has bipartisan support. But the order had plenty of Republican critics who said it would hinder development, in addition to taking issue with a particular portion that relied on the use of the Defense Production Act. Meanwhile, Trump's new order for a return to in-person work called for agency leaders to, quote, take all necessary steps to terminate remote work arrangements and require employees to return to work in person at their respective duty stations on a full-time basis. It includes a carve-out for agencies to make exemptions they deem necessary. Trump also issued an order establishing the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. The order renames the U.S. Digital Service as the United States DOGE Service and charges it with modernizing federal technology and software to maximize government efficiency and productivity. Within USDS, the order also establishes a temporary service organization called the U.S. DOGE Service Temporary Organization that will be led by the USDS administrator. That organization will be focused on advancing the president's 18-month DOGE agenda. Agencies will also be required to establish DOGE teams that will work with the USDS and implement the agenda. Meanwhile, a pair of federal CIOs have been tapped as acting leaders of their respective agencies until the position is filled by a Trump administration appointment. Gary Washington, who has been CIO of the USDA for nearly 7 years and a member of the federal government since 1997, will support the department in the elevated role left vacant by Tom Vilsack, who resigned as the Biden administration left office. Similarly, Jason Gray, who has been CIO of USAID since August of 2022 and a federal technology official for close to 2 decades, will act as his agency's chief until the Trump administration appoints a permanent replacement. So far, Trump hasn't nominated or appointed anyone for USAID's senior leadership roles, including the administrator role, which would require Senate confirmation. For more news at the intersection of the federal government and technology, make sure to visit fedscoop.com. Details are starting to trickle in, as mentioned at the top of this show, about how the Trump administration and its new DOGE will look to use tech modernization as a driver of efficiency in the federal government. But there's still uncertainty about how the new administration will address some key topics like AI, cybersecurity, the tech workforce, and more. Last month, the Alliance for Digital Innovation issued a set of tech priority recommendations for the Trump White House and sent an open letter to the DOGE, offering guidance on how to best approach the federal tech landscape. Ross Nodurft, the executive director of that coalition and former head of the Office of Management and Budget's cybersecurity team, joins me to discuss what those suggested priorities are, how Congress could play a role, and how the DOGE, regardless of politics, could shine a welcome spotlight on improving the state of federal technology. Let's go now to that interview with Ross Nodurft. Ross, so good to see you. Welcome back to the Daily Scoop, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, Billy. Thank you for having me on again.
We're really excited to dive into some of the work that you guys at the Alliance for Digital Innovation have done recently. The two things in specific that I really want to kind of create as you know, flagpoles, tent poles for this conversation. You recently sent out a list of priorities for the new Congress and the incoming Trump administration, as well as an open letter to the Department of Government Efficiency. So let's start. We're about a week out as we're recording this from Inauguration Day, and unsurprisingly, most of DC is really fixated on the coming early days of the Trump administration. So let's talk about those priorities you sent out back in December for the new administration and new Congress. Walk us through what that entailed and what you hope that the new administration and new Congress can take from your thoughts there.
Yeah. So there are three big chunks to the priorities, right? And we have members, just to refresh everybody, our membership is either cloud companies that are working with and partnering with the public sector, or they are people who are supporting those cloud companies in their efforts to work with public sector entities. And that's both the federal and state and local level. So as we were getting together and thinking through what are our priorities for the next administration, what are the priorities for the next Congress, three big buckets came to mind. First, we have an opportunity to fundamentally rethink how we're approaching technology and cybersecurity from an authorization standpoint. And what are the authorities that the government needs to do this differently, better, faster, and actually create the efficiencies that DOGE is looking for? So that's one. Two, we need to, as part of not just the legal efforts, but the administration efforts, we need to expand our acquisition pathways and modernize the way that we are purchasing that technology. That's everything from how are we budgeting for it, how are we buying it, how are we as Congress relates to the administration, how are we appropriating the dollars associated with it. So it's fundamentally rethinking, how do we take dollars and put it on contract with modern technology companies. And then the third bucket is, how do we provide the government access to the breadth and scale and scope of modern technology, right? So over the last several years, we've seen advances in AI, advances in quantum computing, advances in cloud technology and SaaS applications, advances in cybersecurity, right? And none of these are one off by themselves. They all mesh together well. So how are we giving government the ability to access and get the best possible solutions to meet their missions, to help digitize and modernize the way that they're providing services? So that's the last bucket, is kind of how do we give them access to this? How do we create a workforce that's capable and willing to use them in a seamless manner? And then how do we promote that competition as opposed to just having a very small amount of winners and losers? So
a lot to cover there. I want to dive back into that first priority though, because it sounds, it's a very interesting one to me. And I mean, I think that, if just a personal opinion, that legislation should be updated pretty regularly to reflect the change of times. But, it would rest in the hands of Congress, as you call on it, to sort of rewrite some of that bedrock legislation that the federal technology space is kind of rooted in, like the Klinger-Cohen Act or FISMA and different things like that. So talk to me more about those laws that you think need a refresh and how they should be made more relevant for today.
Yeah. So federal government has its authorities derived from, as you said, Klinger-Cohen, but there are four core pieces of legislation out there that govern the way that the administration buys, uses, adopts, leverages, oversees technology. Klinger-Cohen from 1996, the E-Government Act from 2002, and then you have a more modern but still a decade-old cybersecurity law, FISMA from 2014, and then you can throw in FITARA, which is about the same length of time from an age standpoint. Now, these, 96, 2002, 2014. Think about the type of technology we have at our fingertips today in the commercial space. No one's thinking about stuff from 20, 15, 20, 30 years ago. The authorities that govern how we approach technology has not evolved to keep pace with what is out there right now. And I can go into the specifics of some of the things that we need to reconsider. Um, but I will say this in general, and you take it wherever you want, Billy. But um, we we have gone from small, bolted on, one-off uses of technology that's really kind of um, at the tippy point of a spear from a risk standpoint back in 96, right? Using a computer to do some of the things that we're talking about, that was crazy thought back in 1996. Now we're moving significant workloads. We're moving not just like our enterprise infrastructure, but we're also moving applications that drive missions that are in a classified environment into a cloud space, right? Like it's just a completely different environment, right? It's almost apples to oranges at this point in time.
Yeah.
So having authorities that allow us to be flexible and to continue to adopt that technology at the pace in which that technology is coming out is fundamental. And we have an opportunity right now with a Republican president, a Republican House, and a Republican Senate to take a bite at really rethinking how we are as a government adopting technology at a rapid pace. So that includes modernizing technology to allow for less risk-averse view of technology modernization. I think fundamentally at our core, one of the things that slows us down as a government is that we are risk-averse in how we adopt and use technology. That is why the government tends to be behind. That is why the less risky purchases are always pilot programs and they're not rapidly scaled. That's why when we think of the federal acquisition regulation, we think of a stack of paper that's feet high. It's like we have an opportunity right now to kind of crack those laws open, take a hard look at them. I'm not saying that we need to shift so that we are allowing significant risk to our data or our services, but we have an opportunity to think about how do we get the best that digitization and modern government can provide. And I think we're in a space to potentially have those discussions for the first time in a long time.
Yeah, I find that point really interesting. And it really does, in a way, feed into your second priority, your second group of priorities, I guess you'd call it, in terms of tech funding and those acquisition pathways that you mentioned that could bring more of that innovation into government and how that space needs reform, because that legislation kind of gives that opportunity to move some of those things in that way. But obviously, this is something that isn't per se new. It's something that's kind of tormented federal IT for ages, but there's not really been a ton of headway made there. But back to that point, because I think I have the same question about what you just mentioned in this same regard is, are you optimistic that a Trump administration or a Republican dominated Congress might be able to tackle this in a way that historically we really haven't seen a drastic move of the needle in a positive direction?
Yeah, I want to be clear about this because I think it's more apolitical than we often give it credit for. I don't think it's a Republican. I do think that this particular Republican administration and Congress has an opportunity for sure. But let me be clear about where the opportunity lies. We have an administration coming in and a Congress coming in. They're all the same party, which makes the ability to propose and pass legislation a little bit easier. There is an opportunity to move legislation and legal policy forward faster and to rethink how things are going. We have an administration that has stated from the get-go that they are laser focused on finding and creating efficiencies in the system, and technology is at the core of how they are looking to do that. So that creates a unique space for this particular administration. And then we have an opportunity to think about it with a lens that's more business focused, meaning we have a lot of people coming in who have significant business backgrounds and understand the value that can be created from investments in technology. And I think R&D is very important, but I'm not talking about investments in R&D. I do think that needs to happen, and the government does play a role there. But I think that how we buy technology yeah, in the commercial marketplace has shifted so dramatically uh, that the way that we budget and purchase things as a government is not equipped to handle technology, right? The fact that in 2025 the bulk of folks are paying subscription services to listen to books online um, is an example of how, we as consumers are uh, purchasing and consuming technology in a different way. We have Some people have seen this and noticed it and are chipping away at the institutional barriers by creating pathways and creating opportunities or pilots or encouraging folks to think um, in an innovative fashion about how they do something. But we haven't fundamentally changed the calculus that allows them and encourages them to do it. Two things. One, we talked about earlier. We need to rethink how we're structuring risk at the agency level. We need to unencumber the agencies and offer them a less risk averse means of acquiring and consuming technology. And that's what we talked about. That's the first priority. The second priority is we need to give them the resources to invest in that new technology. Right now, I think the number is around 80% is of current funds. So, if you take the budget, and this is a swag, but roughly $90 billion a year goes into the technology in the federal environment. 80% of that is for operations and maintenance for current contracts that are
Yeah.
awarded currently, right? And then we turn around and we say, go do great things, go invest in modern technology. Modern technology, you know, oftentimes you're taking a look at a legacy system, which you're paying dearly to support, and you're saying, well, I don't have the money to invest in that new system while I'm supporting that old system.
Hmm.
So how are we doing that? How are we creating, especially when you get annualized appropriations that, you have to provide at the beginning of the year exactly the amount of money that you think you're going to be able to spend at the end of the year, and you only do it in 1 year chunks. Hey, that is a hard way to budget for technology. If you're in corporate America and you're taking a look and you say, okay, I'm going to adopt some AI solutions, I know that it's going to take X amount of dollars a month. I'm going to be able to scale it. I've got the ability to go back on a regular basis and refresh the asks that I need depending on the type of compute and storage. I can estimate what those workloads are going to be. I can work with companies to do it. I can enter in a subscription model. I can turn it off if I'm not using it at all, right? It allows for flexibility. It allows for a dynamic spending environment. We do not have that infrastructure in Congress through the appropriations process, and I would love to see ADI is pushing for a fundamental rethinking about and I'll say this is inside terminology, but the color of the money is that we are appropriating for agencies. In other words, are we just giving agencies 1 year dollars? Are we giving agencies 2 year dollars? Are we giving agencies dollars that go over a 5 year period to allow them to flex back and forth on how much they're spending on certain things? How much are they putting towards that project that was, that little bit of DM&E they had at the beginning, but now got 5 years worth of money they can do and flex and have that initial spend and then buy down the risk associated with that legacy tail contract, get rid of it, and have a more flexible, functional way to do it, right? And it takes the entire rethink of the system, which is why I'm bullish on the same party in Congress and the administration to get something like this done.
And I think a point that you made that is incredibly relevant, and we'll get into the next point of the conversation I want to go in, is there's going to be, it seems like a new injection of some business-minded, call them Silicon Valley, but really those innovative tech thinking folks. The figureheads of that so far have been those DOGE folks, the Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy team. And so you also penned that open letter, or ADI penned the open letter to
Right.
to the DOGE. Tell us a little bit about, in a few words, what you said on that, and on top of, how you think I guess you or ADI, or really the traditional bureaucracy of DC should approach the DOGE as it comes in and thinks about making some change.
Again, I think this particular administration has put a premium on finding those efficiencies in government and really driving a fundamental rethink and reshaping of how the government does business, which is, where a lot of our membership is interested in looking. And we took, what did we do? We sent a letter with our priorities. It was a topper of the letter, and we summarized the three big buckets, right? The fundamentally rethinking the authorities, the acquisition pathways, and modern approaches to appropriations, and then the increasing access to solutions, and then the workforce, right, and the competition. And we called on them to take a look at what we had in the priorities document, and then start the dialogue and engage with us as people who have a long history of trying to kind of crack the nut on that government adoption of technology, to show them where some of the spots are for innovation and efficiency. And what we are promoting and pushing. We've sent it out to the folks who are on the DOGE. We've used social media to reach out to them. We're excited to see who is filling some of the slots. I recently read that there are going to be some folks that are positioned within the U.S. Digital Service who are going to be focused on some of the recommendations that are coming out of the DOGE organization. So we're going to be able to engage at a granular and operational level with some of the team members over there to really proffer targeted recommendations. And I think that's what I am hearing back from members of the transition team, from people who are in the orbit of the DOGE community, is they want be specific, right? Our points are macro and all encompassing, but they're looking for, give me targeted recommendations. Tell me what you're really seeing out there, how we can drive change. The other thing that we're hearing is, when you go and talk with DOGE and you go and you're trying to make these fundamental changes to how the government's doing business, bear in mind the direction that those agencies are trying to get to, right? And I think that was an important point for our members to hear is, hey, we are looking at certain priorities from an outcome standpoint. We are not modernizing technology for the sake of modernizing the government. We are modernizing the government's technology use to have outcomes that those agencies are going to provide, right? So if you're working with warfighters at the DOD and you want to make them the most lethal and efficient force out there, or you want to protect them as much as you can, make sure that you're couching your recommendations in ways that allow us to achieve those outcomes. And I think that's something that we heard loud and clear, and we're looking forward to continuing to engage on those specific targeted efforts.
So as we close out, just a final question on the DOGE, and I think it kind of ties it all together because, it's that same ecosystem. And I think it really brings to mind, that there is this opportunity for change, and it's also elevating some topics that in the mainstream might not necessarily get that sort of spotlight on the regularity, with the exception of when there's a major crisis or, there's a healthcare.gov or OPM breach or something like that. Typically, federal technology doesn't get the spotlight. But as the DOGE sort of sets its attention to that and gets this elevated attention through the Trump administration, tell me your thoughts on, regardless of politics that people might try to attach to this, do you see that sort of attention on government efficiency and reducing bloat as a really welcome opportunity to shine a spotlight on government technology modernization?
Yes, I think without a doubt. And part of that has to do with who's coming in to lead these efforts. They are, at their core, like I said, they're business people who have a technology bend, right? And that is who you need to drive some of these efficiencies, because where are you going to gain real levels of modern service delivery or modern security? You're going to gain it from the use of technology to do those particular things that government needs to do to be efficient, right? So look, they're going to have, like I said, they're going to have specific things that they want to get done. They're going to want to protect. So an example is, benefits protection. How do you more efficiently allow for benefits to reach the people that need them most while protecting them, right? And there are technological means to do that. There are technological means for delivery, and there are technological means for security. Another example is on the security side, right? How are you leveraging automation and AI capabilities at scale to really take warfighting to the next level. And it's when we say efficiency here, they're looking for efficiencies to make it potentially less humans in the loop, make more rapid decisions around things. People talk about permits all the time. Some of the red tape that we see, some of the regulation that's out there, some of it's going to be taken down, and some of it is going to be looked at and say, how do we make the regulatory process itself, which we may or may not agree with, more efficient? And right, that's a technology play right there. How is AI taking the burden of some of those lower level tasks that get to a point where a key critical human in the loop decision needs to be made, and how are we making that more efficient? And I think that those are the areas that are ripe for innovation. I think that's where we're going to see DOGE, and we're going to see other people, right? Because DOGE it's not just Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. There's going to be a congressional oversight committee that's focused on this. There's going to be people embedded in the EOP that are focused on this. There are going to be people embedded at agencies that are focused on this, and they're going to be looking for those process improvements where technology can take it from a, X number of hours to a much smaller number. So that's where I'm excited to see it happen, and I'm excited because all the levers are in place that can be pulled so that those efficiencies can really be met over the next 2 to 4 years.
We'll make sure to share the link to those recommended priorities, as well as that open letter to the DOGE in the show notes. But Ross, always a fantastic conversation, plenty of insight, and I'm sure this sets us up for a great conversation in a couple months once we see what happens with all of those action items.
Thanks, Billy. I appreciate it. Have a good one.
You too. Take care. For more on the ongoing presidential transition and the Trump administration, make sure to visit fedscoop.com. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Daily Scoop podcast, available on all podcast platforms. If you've already rated the podcast on your platform of choice, thanks so much. High ratings and good reviews of the show help more people to find it. The Daily Scoop podcast is a production of the Scoop News Group in Washington, D.C. Adam Butler and Carlin Fisher help put the show together, and the entire Scoop News Group team contributes. We'll be back tomorrow with more top headlines. Until then, I'm your host, Billy Mitchell. Thanks so much for listening.